Welcome back to the City Current Show. I'm your host, Jeremy Park. We're always honored to bring you inspiring stories of individuals and organizations making a difference, empowering the good. And in this case, we're talking all about how to buy a house. We're honored to be joined by Jessica Randolph, president and co-founder of the How to Buy a House class. How are you doing?
I am so good, Jeremy. Thank you so much for having me. This is actually a bucket list item for me. I've always wanted to be on the radio, so check mark.
There you go. Well, if we're going to put you on, we might as well put you on 9 radio stations overall. So you're going to check the list, check it in a big way. But let's start out because you've got a really cool backstory in terms of how you got into this business. And when you look at even your past, previous HGTV designer on Masters of Flip, National Association of Realtors 30 under 30 winner. So you've got a lot of really cool accolades, but this goes way back in terms of how you got into this. So give us a little bit of your personal background and how you got into this business.
Yeah. So I'm from Chicago and I grew up in one of those suburbs where every house looks exactly the same. And from growing up, I would go through old historic neighborhoods and just drool at the old architecture. And I was just obsessed with old houses. And then I moved to Nashville in 2010, and there was a woman that was renovating some old houses in my neighborhood. And I thought, you know what? I don't even care if it makes any money. That's what I want to do with my life. I just want to be around historic homes and restore these like houses that are falling apart. And a lot of people that had suffered through 2008, 2009, they're like, don't do it. You're not going to make any money. And I'm like, I'm following my dreams. Be quiet. And so I ended up calling that woman that was renovating these houses. And I told her, I said, I don't know what you're up to or if you need any help, but I will do whatever you need for free. I will wash your car. I'll make you a sandwich. I'll sweep the floors of these construction sites, like whatever you need. I just want to be around this career in this industry. And she's like, well, who could say no to free labor? So come on out. And she ended up hiring me the next day, and the rest is history. I started working for her. I helped her build a really successful development company early on in Nashville. And then I realized that my love for homes was there, but also my love for the client was there as well. And I really got to hold the hands of people buying these houses. And that just kind of jump-started my career. But the passion for old homes was what started it. And now it's kind of morphed into the passion for really helping people. And it is a scary process. Buying a house is the most expensive thing you'll probably ever buy. And a lot of people really don't know what they're doing. And that's kind of what birthed the class. So yeah, that's a little bit of my background.
We'll definitely dive in deep on the class and the growth of it and how you've built this amazing business that expands way beyond Middle Tennessee. So we'll talk about that, but give us one, kind of cool story or favorite memory when it comes to the HGTV show, Masters of Flip.
Yeah. So that was a dream come true. Like I said, I always wanted to be in the radio, always wanted to also be on HGTV. But yeah, I got to work alongside Courtney Wilson and Dave Wilson. They had me on for 3 seasons of that show, Masters of Flip. It's also called Music City Fix. So if you're in America, it's Music City Fix. Pretty much in any other country in the US, in the world, it's Masters of Flip. But I got to come on as like an assistant designer. And so we would show up to a job site and they really wouldn't give you a script. They're like, you're going to come in, talk about paint colors, talk about furniture, talk about the decor, action. And I remember the first day being like, I don't know what I'm doing. I've never done this before. And just like praying that it went well. And I remember the second that the director said action, I came to life personally. It was like one of the most fun things I've ever done. And I felt like a fish finally in the ocean. I was like, there's a part of me that was just made to do this. And so yeah, that was really fun. We did a lot of flips together, and I got to just be a part of the design part of it, which is the most fun part, I think. But I actually still use a lot of what I learned from being on that show in my classes and in working with clients, and being able to get somebody to trust you and like you off the bat, and being able to think on the top of your head when someone asks you a question, and just feeling like you're on. And I'm sure you, Jeremy, obviously you're so great at what you do. That is a really fun thing for me, and I love doing it. And so the show was like a perfect platform for me to do that.
You kind of painted the picture of where it started, but go ahead and talk about the class overall.
Yeah. So I wish I would have taken a class like this 15 years ago. I wish my parents would have taken a class like this 30 years ago. And like I told you from my history, I realized how much I really loved the helping people aspect of real estate. And I would say a lot of real estate agents say that that's also why they love being real estate agents. But for me, I felt like there was a missed opportunity of, there are a lot of people that one day they do want to own a home and they have a dream of sitting on the front porch and hosting Christmas parties and owning what they're living in. But it just seems so daunting and scary and expensive. And it doesn't have to be. And most of the time it is doable. It's just a matter of knowing how to do it. And so I actually started teaching this class kind of on accident. And I was approached by a company from being on HGTV, and they're like, hey, we think you'd be a really great teacher having this accolade and having this TV experience. Would you like to be a teacher of some sort? And they were doing a bunch of different topics of classes like photography and watercolor and making charcuterie boards. And they're like, do you want to teach a class? And I was like, yes. And I want to teach people how to buy a house because nobody teaches it correctly. And so I just started teaching it out of a passion for it. And what I ended up seeing was that this is such a necessary step in adulthood, and nobody is teaching it. And no one's teaching it well, in my opinion, or consistently. And so I started teaching in Nashville every month. And that really opened my eyes to the potential of like what this could be. And I really felt like my class was something that where people would show up and be like, yeah, I don't have great credit. I don't have savings, but they come and they feel super comfortable. And I just help them understand the process, and they don't feel awkward. They don't feel unaccepted because of like their financial status, and really educating them on like, in the next 5 years, here's what you can do to get to that point, and how real estate truly can change your life if you know what you're doing. And if you look at the wealthiest people in history, the one thing they all had in common was that they all owned as much real estate as they possibly can. And so it's not a matter of like, oh, if you're wealthy, then you could buy a house. No, anybody, you have to pay to live somewhere anyways. And if you're paying rent, you actually are already paying for a mortgage. You're just paying for your landlord's mortgage. So that's what we talk about in class. And so now, if you're listening to this, no matter where you are in the country, you can go to a how to buy a house class, and they're always free. They're always super informative. They're taught by who we think is the best of the best in that city, and really giving you hands-on advice of what the current market's doing in your city and how you can make that first step yourself. So that's the class in a nutshell.
Walk us through the fundamental pieces of the class, and in terms of the duration, basically some of the major topics. Obviously you don't have to go too far deep because we want people to go to the class, but give us a teaser on the structure.
Yeah. So it's kind of like a happy hour where you learn a lot. But we always start off with talking about, why should you buy a house? Why in general is it a good idea? And then we talk about why buying a house in that city is a good idea. And some markets are obviously very different than others. Obviously, Nashville has been a very hot market since I pretty much got into real estate in 2012. But it's ebbed and flowed just like any other real estate market. And so every class is actually a little bit different because we always update the class based on where the market's at that day. And obviously now where we're at in 2023, we have high interest rates. So we talk about that. Like, what does that mean for the buyer? And a lot of what the media puts out isn't accurate. And they say, oh, you shouldn't buy a house because interest rates are high. I would argue that it's actually a way better time to buy a house now than it was 2 years ago, because you can actually get a house now and negotiate repairs and get your closing costs paid for. And so we talk about the nature of the market as it is right then and there when you walk in the door to class. And then we talk about getting pre-approved. We talk about the financing side of it, which is usually the most confusing part. A lot of people don't know that getting pre-approved is free and that you actually don't need 20% down to buy a house. You can buy a house with as little as sometimes 0% down, depending on your financial situation. But like 3 to 5% down is very normal. And then getting pre-approved and what that looks like, what documents are needed, and really getting the class attendee to understand, like, what does this mean for me, and getting them to have a better understanding of their potential buying power. And then we talk about the steps. So like, once you get pre-approved and figure out how you're going to buy, what does that look like from the time you walk in a house, just like an HGTV show, you're doing a showing and you're walking through the kitchen, you're like, oh, this house is exactly what we want. How do you snatch it up? How do you make sure you're making the right investment? How do you use that house to make money for you? What's a cash out refi? What's a home equity line of credit? What are some repairs that you can do to increase the value of the house? And we really talk about using real estate as a tool to build wealth, because it's not just about living somewhere and paying your mortgage and living there for the next 30 years, but this really is something that you're going to have to pay for anyways. And how can we use that monthly payment to put you ahead financially? And then eventually that house can buy your dream house. And so we just talk about using real estate as a tool. And then we always leave room for questions. It's a very fun atmosphere. People are interrupting me constantly while I'm teaching, and all of our other teachers would say the same. And we want people to feel like they get out as much as possible from coming to class for their own story. And that's really kind of the gist.
Outside of the interest rates, when you look at trends and things, in this world, what are the things that you're focused on in terms of keeping all the information up to date? Because you mentioned you want it, obviously very current, but also localized. So what are the things that you're paying attention to on your end within the housing market?
Great question. And this is something that you guys, whether you're in real estate or not, you can all pay attention to, but keeping track of days on market. So, okay, my neighbor put their house on the market. How many days did it sit there before they had a pending contract on it, or it went not showing, or, they've accepted an offer? Because that really tells you a lot about what's happening in the market. So days on market is huge. For instance, when it's a very crazy seller's market and sellers have the ball in their court, things sell within a day or two, or, within a week, that house is under contract. That tells me it's a seller's market. If something sits there for a month or 2 months, that tells me, oh, I might be able to negotiate a little bit, because that seller is sweating a little bit because they don't know if they're going to sell their house or not, and they're about to move to Texas. So that's more of a buyer's market. So that's something you can keep up with. You can check Redfin, you can check Compass, realtor.com. They'll have the average days on market in your area and in your zip code. So that's just like a fun thing to kind of keep up with. And then inventory obviously plays into that as well. So how many houses, if I'm a buyer, how many houses are on the market in my price range? If there are 50 houses that have 3 beds, 2 baths for $400,000 in my zip code, that tells me I've got time to sleep on it. And I can really have a really nice, I don't know. It's a lot less stressful when it comes to making an offer in a house, because there are a lot of options out there. But if I get on Zillow or Redfin and I look and there are only 2 houses available with that criteria, I know that I'm going to be up against some other people, because odds are if it works for me and my family, it probably works for another family as well. And I'm going to have to be really competitive with what kind of offer I make. So this is all stuff we touch on in class, but I'm looking at days on market. I'm looking at the inventory. The other thing I'm looking at is upcoming development. So I'm always keeping track of the Nashville Business Journal and what new developments are coming in which neighborhood. So for an example, in East Nashville, where I live, they just announced that they're going to be doing these huge 5 to 15 story high rises on a street that I live on, all along the Cumberland River. And I know all those properties that sit along that development are about to completely appreciate. And a lot of those people that own those houses don't even know that that's going on. Obviously, neighborhood meetings and things like that are where you can find out about different developments and different rezones that are happening. But really seeing your neighborhood for what it's going to be in the next 10, 15 years will help you make a decision on, should I stay here? Should I buy? Should I sell right now? Or should I wait? And so really keeping up with what's happening in your city, what new cranes just got installed, and however high the crane is, how tall that building's going to be. So where's the action happening so that I can plan the next 3 to 5 years for my real estate move?
Yeah, that's awesome advice. Talk about kind of perspective, because, you hear, well, you don't want to be necessarily the biggest house on the block, the most expensive, you want to be in a nice neighborhood. At the same time, some people have the ability, like you as a designer, to see, oh, this thing's got good bones, I can make it my own. Others are like, no, I need it move in ready. But, some are the investment, some I've got to, live in it, and I want it to be, my style. How do you frame people's perspective around the investment, the personalization, the ability to renovate? Talk about some of those kind of personal aspects, but how they look at it, as an investment.
Yeah. So I always go to exit strategies with this type of question. So when I'm looking at a property and its potential, I'm not thinking, oh, I love this house. Is it the best house that I can afford in my price range, which is what most buyers do. So if you go get pre-approved tomorrow and they say, hey, you could go and buy a $500,000 house, I would advise my client, don't just go and buy the best house in your price range, best location, best square footage, best finishes on the inside. I wouldn't do that. I would say, what's the best investment I can make with this $500,000? Maybe the best investment is that you buy a duplex for $500,000. That one side has 2 beds, 1 bath. The other side has 2 beds, 1 bath. You don't need a lot of space right now. It's just you, honey. Rent the other side, and now you get to live in this $500,000 investment for free. And then that will over time accumulate. You've got this cash flow. And then eventually, when you do need 3 beds, 2 baths for whatever reason, maybe you've got people visiting you, or you've got a significant other living with you, or you want roommates to live with you, now that investment can fund the next purchase. And so thinking about it in terms of exit strategies of like, okay, I can always turn around and rent this, or I can flip it, or I can hold on to it and use it as a long-term rental if I move out of state. Or maybe you buy a house that is a nice house for $500,000. It's not a duplex, but maybe it's on an acre of land. And you know that there's a lot of really important, or there's a lot of density in that surrounding area. And you could go and subdivide that property and sell off half of your acreage. You don't need a full acre. That's a lot to mow. And that's expensive every month if you're not pushing that lawnmower yourself. So maybe thinking in terms of like, okay, I could subdivide this and sell that land off for $80,000 to $100,000. And now that pays off my principal on my loan. And now my payment's only $1,200 a month. And I'm in my dream house. And, so thinking about things in terms of like, what's the most potential that I can buy with my $500,000 pre-approval letter. That's how I always look at real estate, because life goes on. You don't know what's going to happen in your life. You can't predict the future, and you might get a job offer in another city. And so you want to position yourself in the best possible scenario for whatever comes your way in your life. And if you need to rent it, sell it, renovate it, that's what I would buy, something that has a lot of potential and not just the nicest thing in your budget.
That's awesome advice as well. So talk about some of the ways that we can plug in and stay up to date, because you have podcasts, you have website, obviously, you've got the classes that anybody can access, obviously, as you mentioned, now around the nation. So talk about all the different touch points and then where we can go to carry these conversations forward.
Yes, great question. So the first thing you could do is go to howtobuyahouseclass.com and see if there is a class happening in your market. You can literally click on your state and your city, and you'll see which teacher teaches there and which class they have upcoming, and if you can come. If you cannot go to a class or you don't have one in your city, we do have a mobile app now. It's called Buy a House, or you can literally just Google how to buy a house. It's the first thing on the App Store. And that has a ton of what we talk about in class is really on the app. It's totally free. And we have a lot of really great resources on there, so you feel almost as if you came to class. And then we do have the How to Buy a House class podcast as well. It's on Apple and Spotify. So you can listen to a lot of really in-depth conversations, just like what we talked about exit strategies. We've got a whole episode on that. We have a whole episode on how to have your house make money for you. We have a whole episode on how do I get pre-approved? And we have an episode on the fears of buying. I mean, a lot of the stuff we just touch on in class, we'll get way deeper in each episode in that podcast. So you can listen to those. You can follow us on Instagram. And yeah, that's really kind of where we're at.
Makes it easy.
Yes.
Well, Jessica Randolph, president and co-founder of the How to Buy a House class. Thank you for all you do. Wealth of information indeed. Thank you for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me, Jeremy. Have a blessed day.